session of the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. Can all attendees switch off their cameras and mute their microphone when not speaking? The camera and microphone should only be switched on when you are invited to speak. Guidance on how to do this is contained in the guidance that's been issued to you. I will now ask the clerk to advise the members participating today for all members to confirm their attendance, and once their name has been announced by the clerk so that it's clear in the recording of the meeting, it can also be recorded by the clerk in the minute. Over to you, Mrs. Finch.
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Nicholl, Convener.
Present.
Councillor Yule, Vice Convener.
Present.
Councillor Dunbar.
Here.
Councillor Duncan.
Present.
Councillor Graham.
Present.
Councillor Lumsden.
Present.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Present.
Councillor Many.
Present.
And Councillor Wheeler.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us then to the business for today. We have the internal audit summary page at pages 3 to 18. Mr. Harvey, do you want to say anything about it, or will we just move on into the actual individual papers?
Thanks, Convener. If you're happy for me to introduce it, I'd be happy to do so. This summary sets out the audit work completed since the committee's meeting in February. Following consultation previously with officers and the convener and vice convener, we did bring this to the October meeting as a summary with a link to the full reports rather than providing them in the full agenda pack. But the committee decided that the full report should come back to this special meeting for further formal scrutiny. So we have 14 audit reports included here, which are now included in the agenda. So we've got shutdown of non-essential spend, car parking, bus lane enforcement, ring-fenced funding, the IJB's risk management, civil contingencies, financial ledger system, workforce planning, procurement compliance, information governance, the CMIS system, transformation, gas servicing, social care contract monitoring, and fostering and adoption payments. Can I propose to run through each one at a time? I'll provide a brief introduction to each one and then provide the opportunity for scrutiny and further questions before moving on to the next one.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So if we start with shutdown of non-essential spend, this audit sought to provide assurance over efforts to reduce expenditure at year end to ensure that budgets were met when they were under particular pressure. Generally, we found that instructions were being complied with and monitored, but orders were still being raised without recorded justification. Finance has advised services of the requirements and is continuing to review what is happening in that situation. I'd be happy to take any questions on that.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up from anyone. So do you want to continue?
No, sorry, Convener, I've got my hand up. Just
sorry,
a bit slow there. Sorry, Convener. Really, just to ask. Obviously, there has been some spend that was continued that perhaps it shouldn't have, but in terms of our overall budget, I guess we still were within budget. Would that be correct?
Mr. Harvey?
Thank you, Convener. I believe so. If we have someone from finance here to speak to that, I think that that would provide you with more assurance over that area.
Okay, I've got Mr. Belford on my list. Mr. Belford?
Convener, Mr. Belford's not here today. I'm just looking to see if there is anyone else from finance here.
Okay,
Sorry, I've just raised. Oh, Stephen.
The convener was just to say Carol Smith from Finance is here, and I'm here if there's any further questions.
Okay, Mrs. Smith, do you want to try and answer that question?
Yes, so happy to confirm that it was all kept within budget, yes.
Okay.
Okay, and sorry, Convener, just as a follow-up, I guess it's because this isn't the only lever that finance has to maintain the balanced budget. I'm thinking of the quarterly reports that come to committees also, and I guess it's really just to think, this is not the only process we have to try and maintain the budgets we've got. There is also other things that are done and to make sure that we have got the balanced budget that we need.
Convener, I'm happy to take that question. Yeah, I mean, we have a whole host of tools that we deploy during the course of the year to ensure that we deliver a balanced budget. So everything from things with budget holders. So I know that the finance staff, for example, will be out meeting all those budget holders. We'll have discussions through ECMT, through CMT, and again, as we go through the year, trying to predict where we think we're going to land. We can take other corrective action as well if we think that's appropriate. Obviously, we do the quarterly reporting to committee. So again, if we need any committee decisions around any particular issues or any particular decisions that we need the committee to make, again, we have that facility available to us during the course of the year. So this is just one tool in the box of how we try and make sure that the council's in a strong financial position come the end of the financial year.
Thank you, Convener.
Any further questions? I'm not seeing anything on my screen. Back to you, Mr. Harvey.
Thanks, Convener. So our next one is car parking and bus lane enforcement. Generally, we find that procedures are comprehensive, but a service level agreement does need to be updated. Reconciliations need to be improved so that we've got assurance over the completeness of the income. And we have asked that the service review whether debt should be cancelled or written off because the requirements and implications vary between the two approaches. A new system is planned to be implemented, which alongside management review of the associated procedures is expected to address most of the points that we highlighted to the service. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, I've got Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. Convener, just a point of clarity on how we're dealing with this morning. So have we moved on to each substantive report now?
No, I was taking us through the summary and then we can go through each individual report.
Okay, because I think it's probably more appropriate for me to then ask my question when we get on to the substantive report rather than the detail. Yeah. So just to clarify, it was questions about Mr. Harvey's summary that we're talking about. Yeah. Okay, I had Councillor Maney's hand up. Do you still have a question or was it similar?
I'll wait till the substantive report as well.
Okay. Councillor Gordon Graham.
Okay, perhaps I should have waited till the substantive report, but there's an executive summary. It says, and it was mentioned in the report, it says cash collection records are not routinely reconciled and investigated where discrepancies arise. Now, I remember, or I recall, I may be wrong, during the last audit that this was also picked up, and it may be that it hasn't been acted on. Can you advise, do you look at previous audit reports before you go in, and was this the case?
Mr. Harvey?
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we do look at previous reports. I think that the last time this was reviewed was before we took on the internal audits of Aberdeen City Council. I don't recall there being a particular issue before, but I could have a look to see if we have that in other areas. It's the sort of thing that we pick up as we go through each audit. We would want to make sure that there were checks and balances in place to make sure that income was complete and checks were being done. So it wouldn't be dissimilar to any other area where we review cash collection. I don't think, well, the service was quite clear that there were procedures in place, but they needed to be reviewed and ensured that they were still being undertaken as appropriate. So I think we need to wait for the service to come back with further information as to what they're doing so we can close off that action when they've completed it.
Councillor Graham, have you got any comeback on that?
No, it's okay. It just we had a similar response to last time, but I'll just leave it at that and we'll just monitor it. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Harvey. I don't have anybody else.
Thank you, Convener. Then our next report is on ring-fenced funding. Grants are generally being administered in line with requirements, but we have recommended a grants register be produced and procedures clarified a little to promote consistency in recording and allocation of spend.
Okay. Anybody wish to ask Mr. Harvey a question? Don't have anything. Back to you, Mr. Harvey. Oh, Councillor Duncan.
On the same principle as Councillor Graham in the previous report, I noticed at paragraph 343 that Finance have agreed to review procedures to ensure decision-making can be adequately supported within the magic timescales, and they're talking about the medium-term financial planning would be developed to help with that. I wonder if you were satisfied that that met the terms of your recommendation. Are you content with that approach to deal with the situation where grants might then stop and there's still expenditure to be incurred?
Through you, Convener, I think that is a decision to be made by the organisation and supported by Finance. The reason for it is that we don't always know what is going to happen going forward, and we can't preempt any of the decisions that the council or any of its committees might make in terms of the policy implications and how that money is spent. I think that is absolutely reasonable, and we can only do what we can with budgeting with the best information we have available, which is reviewed regularly by Finance and by the services that utilise the funding. So I am satisfied with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any further questions from anyone at this time? I don't have anything on my screen. Back to you, Mr. Harvey.
Turn myself off mute. Yes, the next one was the Integration Joint Board's risk management processes. This has been reported to the IJB's Audit Committee and is shared here for the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee's information. Governance arrangements are in place and were scheduled for review. The risk management processes are not yet fully aligned across the different partners, but work is progressing to ensure that is the case going forward.
Okay. And I don't have any hands. If you want to continue, please.
Thank you, Convener. Civil Contingency is next. So governance arrangements, plans, training and testing regimes are in place, although some require a little further development, and business continuity plan testing needs to be scheduled and reported to the Public Protection Committee, which it is intended will receive additional information in its annual resilience report, which is to be published shortly. Further development is being undertaken on the place risk register, which is going to be expanded to further cover civil contingencies risks.
And I don't have anything. If you want to continue, please.
Next up, we have the financial ledger system. Positive assurance was gained over the system, with the only significant issue being making sure that users had completed all of the required training in advance of being set loose on the system. Other than that, we were quite happy with the way that that was being operated.
And no hands up. If you want to continue, please.
Okay, next up we have workforce planning, another generally positive report. We obtained positive assurance that plans are clear, supporting mechanisms are in place, and progress is being subject to appropriate monitoring. Progress is also going to be reported to the Staff Governance Committee in due course.
And I have no hands up for that one either. Back to you, Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. Our next report is on procurement compliance. We sought to obtain assurance that arrangements in place to ensure compliance with procurement legislation and internal financial and procurement regulations were appropriate and being adhered to. We found that across a sample of high-value expenditure, this wasn't always the case. Contract opportunities were not always being tendered for, or were not tendered for sufficiently in advance of the requirement. Contract awards were not always being published as required. Spend was not always being aggregated to identify the scale of procurement required. Contracts were not always being registered or fully detailed on the Council's contract register to show that they had been procured appropriately. It was also not possible to trace spend back to committee or delegated approvals because things were not on the register and because things had not been assigned relevant reference numbers to allow that tracing to take place. In addition, purchase orders are not always being raised in advance of requirements or spending as required by the Council's no purchase order, no payment policy. The Commercial and Procurement Shared Service supports services to fulfil their obligations and provides training and support as required. They will also be reviewing use of the contracts register and offering additional support where needs are identified. Procurement compliance is also now being subject to more regular scrutiny by extended corporate management team and various other controls have been put in place as a result of this report.
Anybody got any questions for Mr. Harvey at this time? I'm not seeing anything. Back to you, Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Peter. Our next report is on the, almost skipped one, is on information governance. Generally, the controls in place are appropriate. The committee has also received a report recently in respect of performance in this area. I believe that went to the last committee.
I'm not seeing any hands up at this time. Back to you, Mr. Harvey.
Next up, we have the CMIS system, which is the management information system for the schools. We highlighted some issues in respect of system user administration and training records that indicated users were not all up to date in respect of GDPR and information governance. Data sharing agreements also need to be reviewed or put in place in respect of some external organizations with which we share data from the system.
No hands up at this time. Back to you, Mr. Harvey.
Next up, we have transformation. We sought to review the Council's progress in achieving its transformational aspirations and reviewed the governance arrangements and the supporting controls and systems covering these. The arrangements in place we found are clear and assurance is being provided that progress is being and has been made with transformation. Most of the changes that were planned are now in fact reflected in day-to-day operation of the Council. We did highlight some potential weaknesses in this system that's used to plan and report achievement of milestones within the various different programmes. The corporate management team receives regular assurance over progress and is adequately assured by these reports that it receives. However, officers have been tasked with reviewing whether the system could provide more consistent evidence of progress. Financial return on investment is not being separately reported. It has been built into the Council's budget and financial strategy.
And I don't see any hands for that one. Back to you, Mr. Harvey.
Thank you. Next up is the gas servicing contract. Generally, gas servicing is being completed as required by legislation and regulations. So health and safety compliance is being demonstrated. Only minor issues have been highlighted for review by the service to do with completeness of documentation. We had highlighted potential risks regarding procurement of the contractor for gas servicing, which the service was reviewing at the time we concluded this report with commercial and procurement. There has in fact been a contract in place since April, which we had not reflected in this report. So apologies for not updating it to reflect that. We have had confirmation from procurement that there is a compliant contract obtained from a framework and which has been in place since April.
Okay, not seeing anything on that one either. Back to you, Mr. Harvey.
Next up, we have Social Care Commission Services contract monitoring. We did highlight that monitoring procedures could be improved, particularly in respect of scheduling that monitoring activity, which was at risk of not being completed promptly. That has in fact been overtaken by events due to COVID-19. There have been further delays in being able to undertake that, but at the same time, the service is supporting a number of suppliers more directly than it was in the past to ensure that they are meeting their requirements in lieu of the scheduled monitoring activity. We also highlighted where an instance of a contract not being signed prior to using services, and a need for a consistent approach to recording the monitoring activity to ensure that you can see why the decisions have been made to go into, for example, non-compliance procedures.
Okay. And I'm not seeing any hands up for that. Anything further? Mr. Harvey, sorry.
Thank you. Finally, we have fostering and adoption payments. Generally, these are being processed accurately, although there were some minor errors which were identified due to system date settings and minor administrative errors. These have been resolved, and the service has put additional support and checks in place pending a new system being developed and implemented. Procedures and the related filing processes are being updated to take account of our recommendations.
Okay. And I have no hands for that. The recommendation at 2.1 was simply to discuss comments on the issues raised in this report. Does anybody mind it otherwise? Don't see anything. Can we agree that then? And we'll then move to 1.1. If anybody's otherwise minded. Okay, 1.1. Mrs. Smith, do you wish to say anything before we open for questions?
No, thank you. I think the report summarises things very well.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mrs. Smith? I'm not seeing anything on that. So can we agree the recommendation in that case? Or is anyone minded anything else? The recommendation is, hold on, if I just scroll to my page. Hang on. There isn't a recommendation as such, is there? Can we agree? Nobody saying otherwise? Okay, 2.1.2, car parking and bus lane enforcement. I have yourself, Mr. White. Is there anything you wish to add to the report before we go to questions?
Nothing from me, convener, no.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. White? I've got Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, convener. I'm at the recommendation on page 35 under 2.3.16. It's this business about service writing off charges rather than cancelling them if the debt is uncollectible. And it was obviously, the report explains that this was based on previous legal advice. And the recommendation is that the practice is changed. Instead of cancelling a penalty charge notice, it is then written off and then reported back through the normal process for reporting debts. I presume that goes to City Growth and Resources. But I'd just like a comment if the position has been reconfirmed with legal and what the intention is going forward on that.
Mr. White?
Convener, I can take that question.
Mrs. Mackenzie.
Mrs. Mackenzie, thank you. Yes, I can confirm that we have reviewed the decision, and it has been agreed that PCNs will be cancelled where they're not valid. So that would be determined by an appeal, for example, and that PCNs will be written off where they are valid, but we've chosen not to pursue it. And for example, that would be in circumstances where a customer is deceased or sequestrated, and the write-offs will be reported to committee. And yes, it's City Growth and Resources.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that very comprehensive answer. Thank you, convener. No further questions.
Okay. As any other questions? Don't. Oh, Councillor Lumsden.
Yeah, thank you, convener. I had a couple of questions. One was on the parking. I was trying to work out from the report, how do we know how much money is being collected from a cash box, from the machine? Are we just wholly reliant on the provider and given that information, or is there a new technology that can feed that information back live to the council? How does it actually work?
Mrs. Mackenzie, are you able to take that one?
I can take that one, Mark Wilson.
Yeah, I think that's for Mr. Wilson.
Yeah.
I would do it, Mr. Wilson. If you could take that one then, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So at the moment, the machines are quite old and aged, so we rely on them being able to live update to the back office system, which gives us a rundown of what charges have come through the machines. Unfortunately, due to their age, a lot of them are now failing, and some of the modems don't connect and things like that, so it's not as up to date as we would ideally like. We have been in discussions with the new contractor. We've just changed cash collection provider to G4S. So we're working with them on identifying a new procedure for being able to verify exactly what they've actually collected from the machine. It does produce a receipt when they take the cash box, so we know what should be in the cash box and whether or not it matches what they've actually collected.
But from reading the report, we don't actually get that receipt back to the council, do we?
They log the receipt as part of the process, and the machine puts an entry in its audit log as well that box was collected and this is how much was taken.
And in terms of, I guess a lot of this is a lot easier when we go to cashless as more and more people
Yes,
are.
it is,
What
yeah.
sort of percentage have we if we move from cash to cashless?
So off the top of my head, last year we did about 1 million transactions in cashless parking, and we did about 1.2 million, I think, through cash. So it seems to vary. If you go to a car park, you'll most likely find that the cashless parking element is round about 60 to 70%. But if you go to on street where people are parking for less time, maybe 20 minutes, 40 minutes, they'll often just put the change in the machine and do that away.
Okay, thank you. Another question, if I may, convener, about the appeals team and bus lane and parking appeals and things being written off. What sort of scale is that? How many are we talking about here? Is it a low number? Is it a high number? What's the?
I'll have to pass you on to Jackie for that one.
Ms. Mackenzie.
Thank you. I'm going to ask actually for Mr. Connell to come in because he'll have more of the detail on the volumes. So,
okay. Mr. Connell.
Thank you, convener. Off the top of my head, it's the appeals are still very low. I don't have a percentage figure for you, but I could get it and circulate it should you require.
It was just to get some sort of idea, convener, of, is there an issue here or not really, and having that sort of information would give us that sort of that indication, I guess.
No, I quite agree. Would it be possible, Mr. Connell, to do that and circulate it to the members of the committee?
Not a problem. We can get that circulated. What I would say is my understanding is it's quite low. So the number of appeals is quite low, and the number of appeals that are accepted are quite low as well. But we'll get the data and circulate it. Not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Have you anything further, Councillor Lumsden?
No, Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Any questions on this paper? I'm not seeing any hands. In that case, we'll move to 1.3, ring fence funding. Questions for officers? Councillor Many.
Hi, thanks, convener. I'm noticing that most of the recommendations have the implementation date of September. Given that COVID has quite an impact on resources, have all these recommendations been implemented, or has there been any sort of impact?
Can I answer that one? It's Carol Smith.
Yes.
Just to say that there's two kinds of recommendations. There's a number of them that are around actually ensuring that the records are kept and are complete. So like 2111, 233 and 2310, those are all complete and haven't been impacted by COVID. There are a few recommendations around finalising and developing procedures. So those we're hoping to be able to report that they have been completed by the next audit committee, but those are still being finalised at the moment.
Thanks for that. That's
Councillor Graham.
Okay, thanks, convener. I'm on about the 2.4.5, and it's the last recommendation. We've got the recommendation, we've got the service response action, and we've got internal audit comment, and they say there remains a risk if funding ceases at short notice, and the grading is significant within audited area. Now, given the comments from the service, does he still think that the risk is significant, or does he think that the risk is reduced to low?
Who's going to take that answer?
Thanks, convener. I'll take that if that's okay.
Okay.
I think that we've accepted that there is very little the service can do in respect of if ring-fenced funding should come to an end. One would hope that that would be advertised and information provided on that at an early stage and fed into the budget process, but that may not always be the case. The risk remains significant, but the likelihood is considered by the service to be relatively low, and there are mitigating approaches in place to make sure that the budget is updated with the best available information. So we have accepted that that is the case, but there still remains a risk there.
Okay, Councillor Graham, do you want to come back on that?
No, okay, I'm fine.
Okay, Councillor Lumsden.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Just to ask officers, any underspends on any of the ring-fenced funding, what happens with that? Have we got leeway to spend it after the year end, or is it clawed back immediately?
Maybe I could take that, convener. It would be dependent on the grant. I mean, some grants they do have year-end flexibility. Others, they are obviously looking for the spend to be by the end of the financial year or within a defined period. So each grant is looked at in terms of its own terms and conditions, and we ensure that where appropriate, if we do need to carry forward, that we've got the necessary authority from the grant giving or grant providing body.
And if I can follow up, if we're given money for a ring-fenced issue, and we spend more than that, I guess that just we have to find that savings from somewhere else in our general revenue account.
Where that was likely to happen, that should be getting captured through your quarterly reporting and authority approved through committee to incur that position. So again, we would be looking to make sure that that was reported through our financial reporting and making sure that the committee and elected members are cited on that.
Okay. Any further questions from anyone? I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, can we agree to move on to the next report if there are no further questions? 1.4, the IJB risk management. Anybody, any questions? I'm seeing Councillor Graham.
Okay, again, it's similar to the last one. Most of the recommendations should have been implemented in April. Have these been implemented, or do you plan to carry out a follow-up audit?
Mr. Harvey?
We will be following up to ensure that that's taken place shortly. There is no plan at the moment to do another audit of this area in the short term, but yes, we'll be in touch with officers to get an update on those, which will be reported back to the next committee.
Okay, that's fine.
This being to do with the integration joint board, we will be reporting to them in the first instance, and then back to the Audit Risk and Scrutiny Committee if there are any further actions in respect of the council's activities.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I've got Mr. Allen wanting to come in. Mr. Allen, can you help us?
Yeah, thanks, convener. If it helps the committee, just by way of update in relation to some of those recommendations, for example, at 2.1.4, the risk appetite statement was taken to the IJB in January 2020 and approved. The IJB held a workshop just last month, and there's a further revision to the risk appetite statement being taken to the next IJB on the 1st of December. Also, in relation to 2.1.5, the Board of Students Escalation Framework was approved by the IJB's Risk Audit Performance Committee in September this year. Also, at 2.3.2, just by way of update, the workshop that was to be held in February 2020 in relation to the operational risk register was held at that time. And then finally, in relation to 2.3.8, the next review of the IJB scheme of governance is planned for early 2021. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Allen. Councillor Graham, do you wish to come back on any of that?
No, I'm fine. Thanks very much for the information. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Any further questions on this paper? I haven't seeing any hands at this time, so we'll move on to 1.5, the civil contingencies. Any questions for, in the first case, Mr. Harvey, and thereafter for the report? Councillor Many.
Just a quick one around the business continuity plan scheduled to be presented at the Public Protection Committee next month. Is this still on track for next month's committee?
Mr. Harvey, are you able to take that one?
I see Vicky Cuthbert with her hand up there. I think she'd be better placed to respond on that.
Thanks so much. Mrs. Cuthbert, please.
Thanks, convener. Yes, that's still on track. We're reporting to the Public Protection Committee next month with our Resilience Annual Report, and we'll include details within that.
Thank you very much for confirming that.
Any other questions? Not seeing any hands on my screen. In that case, we'll move on to the next paper, 1.6, the financial ledger system. Does anyone have any questions on 1.6? Councillor Ewell.
Thank you, convener. Just to ask, and I'm sure the answer will be yes, if there's a couple of three recommendations with implementation dates of earlier this year, can it be confirmed, please, that those have been implemented, or what the revised implementation dates would be, if not?
Okay, I've got Mrs. Smith. Are you wishing to answer that question, Mrs. Smith?
Yes, just to confirm that they have all been completed.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Lumsden.
Yeah, thank you, convener. It's just around 2.26 in the report. It talks about, let me try and find it, where patches are tested first before they're applied, I think it says. I'm just trying to work out how is that done? Is there a separate system altogether that's tested on before it's moved to the live system?
Yes, there's a separate test system. It's all very secure.
Okay, thank you. I did have another question. I'm trying to find it. I think it was around business continuity, but I cannot find it just now. Business continuity. Can't find it, convener, so apologies.
Not at all. Do you want a minute to see if you can find it?
No, it's okay.
Sure.
If it was important, I would have highlighted it. Thank you.
Okay, if you come back to it, if you find it later, we can. I'm sure we can go back. I'm sure Mrs.
Okay.
Smith will answer. Thank you very much. Any further questions on this? I'm not seeing anyone. I think that takes us to 1.6. Is it? We're at financial ledger system. Oh. Any questions? Yeah. Someone has their microphone on because I can hear the clicking of something. Just to let you know. In that case, 1.7 workforce planning. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, convener. I was struck by how positive this report was on workforce planning in the council, and I think that the service should be congratulated for that, because it's a fundamental part of the target operating model that we remodel how we attract, recruit and retain people in the organisation. So my question is actually about the recommendation on page 98 about the digital tool for the recruit scheme for us to enable internal moves and internal recruitment. It says that it's going to be developed and launched by December. I wondered, a bit like Councillor Many's previous question, if COVID has had an impact on that and how it was getting on.
I'm happy to answer, convener, if you're
yes, please. Yes.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Councillor Duncan. Like you, I was really pleased that this is a positive report. It's obviously very close to my heart, and my team have been working extremely hard on this. In terms of the recruit scheme, there has been an impact from the team's need to really put all of their energy into the pandemic response. However, where we're at the moment is that the principles of the recruit scheme are absolutely in place. So in terms of the prioritisation of internal recruitment and the order of prioritisation, as well as looking further upstream and developing talent pipelines into our hard to fill roles, all of that is absolutely underway and in place. In terms of implementing the digital tool, we had got to a really good place by March. And of course, we had impacts from then onwards. However, we have picked that up again in the last 6 to 8 weeks, and we're now in the process of actually doing a pilot. So we have people in the scheme signed up who are really fully testing it for us. So although it may be a challenge to be fully implemented by December, we welcome this recommendation because we feel it endorses the progress we've made so far and our endeavour to get this fully launched and in place for staff. It will mean that we need to extend our current contract with the provider that we've been working with, but we're really satisfied with the work that we've been doing with them to date. And we've had fantastic positive feedback, both from trade unions and from staff on this model and on this approach.
Councillor Duncan, have you got any comeback on that?
No, just to thank Ms Newcombe for her answer. It was very reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Newcombe. I have Councillor Many.
Hi, it was the same question as Councillor Duncan, and Ms Newcombe answered it. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Any further questions for Mrs Newcombe? Not seeing anything on my screen. So we'll move to 1.8, Procurement Compliance. Questions for officers? Councillor Lumsden, and then I've got Councillor Graham and Councillor Many. Councillor Lumsden, please.
Yeah, thank you, convener. It was really just to get some sort of maybe comment from officers around this report. When you're reading it, I'm sure everyone agrees it doesn't read very well. There's a lot of major points brought up, and really just to hear from officers how they felt this report has been received, and what okay, there's specific recommendations, but whether there's anything overall that's been reviewed in light of this report.
Okay, I've got Mr. Innes.
Thanks, convener. If I can just come in there to answer Councillor Lumsden's question. The audit report has really helped us to further formulate an improvement plan around this, which we obviously take very seriously, and hopefully I can provide the committee with some assurances just on that. We now have a robust process workflow in place in regarding to our spend and how we commission that spend. So in essence, depending on the threshold, anything above £50,000 requires a formal business case. That business case is viewed and scrutinised by colleagues in legal, procurement and finance before it is escalated up to the Demand Management Control Board, where it goes through a number of gateways and challenges there as well. And that's part of the travel to committee, depending if it's revenue spend or capital spend. Also, to supporting that in the last year through COVID, each chief officer has been exceptionally proactive and ensuring that their officers involved in the procurement process are trained. We've trained 403 officers during that period of time. And that's across 7 different modules, depending on what they're actually involved in. And at the end of that, there's an actual test, so it's not just a tick box exercise in relation to going through this training. And they are then assigned what we call DPA, and that's Delegated Procurement Authority status. So they've shown that they have full awareness of the process and the requirements that they need to follow before they're involved with this. What we've also got is audit compliance is key within, we're risk register. That risk register is now scrutinised and oversight is provided by what was ECMT stewardship, now going into the risk board. There's also oversight through the chief executive on our shared procurement board regarding that. So feeding in there, we have compliance reporting now on a monthly basis. We have a finance and procurement data forum that looks at that, aligning budget data with contract data and contract spend to make sure that what needs to then subsequently go on to the contract registers is robust and correct. The contract register system itself was a bit clunky previously, and we've invested a lot of time on upgrades on that, and that's also part of the training modules that I've spoken about. So quite a number of steps, heavy investment in time is gone in there, and a lot of engagement with services, and the chief officers taking real responsibility for this as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Innes. Fairly full reply. Councillor Lumsden, you got anything further?
No, well, really to thank Mr. Innes first of all for that explanation. I think that's really reassuring that there has been a lot of work done and still continues. I guess the only further question I have, convener, is I'm looking at the implementation dates for many of the major issues that were identified. Are those dates? Are we still looking at meeting those targets that are set, Mr. Innes?
Yeah, we're looking to meet everything in full.
Thank you.
Anything further, Councillor Lumsden?
No, that's everything. Thanks, convener.
Thanks so much. Councillor Graham, I have you next.
Okay, thanks, convener. It's regarding 3.18 gas servicing and installations. We've also got a report on agenda item 1.12 on the gas servicing contract. My first question is, what's the difference between the two audits?
Mr. Harvey, do you want to take that in the first instance?
Thank you, convener. The difference is timing. The gas servicing, although it says it was issued in September, we had largely agreed the report with the service in February. And I had not updated it to reflect that we'd also looked at some of the contractual issues as part of this audit. So apologies for the confusion there. It is the same contract we're talking about. It's just that things had moved on and been resolved since, as you can see in this one here.
Okay, yes, thanks. I've got another question.
Yes, please.
Okay, then, in same one, gas service and installation, at 3.18.3, it says additional payments have been made to the supplier for works outside the contract. Not all of these have an official purchase order, and the works are being directly awarded without competition. But is there scrutiny applied basically to determine if the works are necessary?
Mr. Harvey?
I think it's Mr. Booth that would answer that, convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. Mr. Booth?
Pick that up if that's okay. So any additional works that come from the contract, and that will be works that are identified when the annual gas servicing is undertaken. So it makes sense for that to be done by the contractor there and then. They're then reported back as exceptions within the report, and a percentage of them are then inspected by my gas inspector team.
Okay.
It's quite a high percentage. It's around 50%, but I can confirm that.
Thank you very much. Next, I've got Councillor Many, followed by Councillor Duncan. Councillor Many.
Thank you, convener. I was just interested in 3.5 personal protective equipment. It's saying the estimated value of 1.4 million between 2017 and 2020. I'm assuming that's significantly increased this year. What kind of commentary have we got around that?
Somebody to take that question. Let's see.
Sorry, Councillor. I'll
take that.
Sorry, convener. It's Craig and it's here. If Councillor Many could just repeat the question, I'll try and answer it. Sorry.
Yeah, it's the personal protective equipment spend. I'm assuming that's significantly increased this year. I was just looking for some more commentary around it. It's 3.5, page 118.
Yeah, as you would expect, that will have increased. At hand, I don't know what level that's sitting at, but you know, I can certainly go into the system and come back with a figure within year spend to you, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Could you maybe do that, please, and maybe circulate it to the committee, Mr. Innes?
Of course, no problem.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, convener. I was reassured by the comprehensive answer that Mr. Innes gave to Councillor Lumsden's question. I have a particular question about the use of call-offs under framework agreements. It's page 113 in the report, and there was a recommendation to look further at this and get more assurance that call-off contracts are being recorded and there's supporting evidence. And there's talk here of a short life working group on the contract register. I wondered if we could have more information about that short life working group and an update on its progress, please.
Thank you. Mr. Innes, are you able to take that one?
Yeah, we have a short life working group with the various teams. primarily procurement and finance, and then service reps as needed, and with that's been part of the data forum group, and how we actually link that call off spend to contract spend to make sure that we've got full visibility and breakdown of it, and it can actually be seen on the contract register. So we're very much at an advanced level with that.
Councillor Duncan.
If I could just come back, and I have a separate question as well, if you'd indulge me after that, Convener. I'm just going back to that. So whose responsibility is it to make sure that call-offs are compliant and that they're being reported? Is it service, or is it the central procurement service? Where does the responsibility lie for that?
The services have got devolved responsibility for that.
Okay, and you're now, this is part of your training program for service managers to make them aware of the obligation. Okay.
Yes.
That's very reassuring. My separate question, Convener, and thanks for letting me come in again, is it's in Appendix 2, 3.14. There's spend on agency staff for which there's no contract. Now I know that internal audit picks up stuff, but I just wondered if there was a comment from the service here about what's being done to rectify that position, because obviously we use a lot of agency staff in the council.
In fact,
I've got Mrs. Newcombe has put up her hand. I wonder if Mrs. Newcombe can maybe help with that question. Yeah.
Thank you, Convener, and happy to come in after Craig if Craig was going to answer first. The comment I was going to make, however, was that we've been looking at improvements to agency spend more generally, and we have in place a cross-service redesign which we've been looking at. The result of that is that we have a new procedure for the approval of agency spend in draft, and myself and Craig are working together, and our teams are working together on that, so that we can ensure that the spend on agency has been through absolutely more stringent approval process, which should reduce these instances and these risks significantly. Craig may want to add to that, though.
Thank you for that, Mr. Innes.
No, I think Isla's covered it well there. That's primarily what I was going to say as well. Thanks.
Councillor Duncan, have you anything further? Okay, thank you very much. I've got the Chief Exec, Mrs. Scott. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you, Councillor Nicola. It was just to go back to Councillor Many's question about the PPE, and to be helpful for the committee, and I understand the interest in the PPE spend of council during COVID. There has been a kind of complex landscape around PPE, the procurement that sits with us locally, what we're doing through Scotland Excel and the national frameworks there, and then also the links into the NSS. So I just was going to suggest that in addition to the profile of the spend, that the committee might want to ask Mr. Innes to give a profile of the controls that have been applied to that spend and the relevant procurement controls, given the kind of plethora of organisations that have been involved in the PPE spend during the COVID.
That sounds like a very good idea to me. Mr. Innes, would it be possible to do that? Yes?
Yes, I can happily provide that.
Yeah, is the committee minded to agree to that? I think that's a very good idea.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. I have no further hands in front of me. Now, I did have one hand, and before I could note it, it went down again. Councillor Lumsden, I've got your hand this time. Thanks.
I've just sneaked my hand up at the death there, Convener. It's just around 2.41, the no purchase order, no payments policy. Obviously, there is going to be instances where that is not possible, and I think some of them are documented there. But it's really just to try and get an idea of the scale of that problem, or if it's just a minor issue.
Mr. Innes, are you able to take that, or do we have someone else?
Yeah, I think it's has been an issue, and like I said, with the controls that we've got, so something that we've managed to square off. Just again through the training, the officers are well aware that regarding the purchase orders being raised and that commitments, and we've made the supply chain well aware of that as well at their end.
Can I come back in, Kavita? It's really just, is this a problem that's getting better, or is it just levelled out, Mr. Dennis?
It's a problem that's getting better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Smith.
I was just going to reiterate Mr. Innes' comments that the problem is getting better, and both through the non-essential spend audit recommendation and recommendations here, we are continuing to, from a financial perspective, make considerable steps and implement processes to ensure that non-compliance is managed effectively.
Okay. Thank you, Kavina, that's helpful.
Okay. Any further questions for officers on this paper? Don't seem to have any more hands. If we can then move to the next paper, which I have on my list, is 1.9, information governance. Questions for officers? I'm not seeing any hands on that one. 1.10, we can move through. CMIS, Councillor Duncan.
Yes, I'm on page 146, convener. It's the two schools who purchased an alternative system. I was a bit surprised to see that, to be honest, but actually the question's about data compliance with GDPR with that system. And I noticed there's a recommendation, paragraph 246. Sorry, I'll just bring it up. And I wondered what was being done to make sure that the on-the-button system was complying with our data protection requirements, and also an explanation for why schools bought a different system rather than using CMIS.
Do we have an officer for that? I've got Miss Shepherd.
Thank you, convener. The two schools actually purchased that system many years ago. Just really at the time when we moved away from our old system onto the national system of CMIS. The challenge has been that system offers quite a lot of functionality around tracking and monitoring, and CMIS are working very, very hard to catch up and are about there. So there's been understandable concern from schools about losing some of that functionality. However, it obviously does need to comply with relevant legislation. So we've had officers working with on the button themselves and with schools to look at the controls that would need to be in place. And the plan would be that actually we'll cease using that, and that is imminent. We're literally just working through the last of the fine details, but I would hope to be able to provide a kind of conclusive update at the next meeting of this committee.
Okay, Councillor Duncan, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, thank you. Not actually to Mrs. Shepherd, that's a really helpful answer. I think it's probably a comment for Mr. Harvey, actually. I think it would have been a relevant piece of information in the audit report to make it clear that the on-the-button system was a legacy system before CMIS, because that's a different context and leads to different questions about compliance on these issues. I wonder if Mr. Harvey would like to comment on that or reflect on that through you, convener.
Certainly. Mr. Harvey.
Thanks, convener. Thanks, Councillor Duncan. Yes, we perhaps could have made that clearer. The implications are the same. We are required to have data processing agreements in place and impact assessments, regardless of whether the system has been there for a long time or if it is new. It's a requirement of the General Data Protection Regulation and the Data Protection Act that stems from that, or that reflects the content of that. So the implications are the same, but yes, I agree. We could have had a little bit more on the nature and how we got there, rather than perhaps, as it reads, sounding like they've gone and purchased a new system. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Anything further, Councillor Duncan? No, your light's gone off. Councillor Lumsden.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It's around the points in 2.2.9 and also 2.211. It's about accounts that are, well, people have left employment, but the accounts still seem to be there. So I guess the first point is to ask, has that implementation of April 20 been met in terms of having I think it's an audit there of accounts that are no longer there? And I guess the second question is, surely we know when people are leaving employment, why don't we have a process to flag up when somebody leaves so their account can be deleted?
I'm happy to take that, Convener, if helpful. I think it's a very, very good point, Councillor Lumsden, that there should be almost an automatic removal from CMIS. With CMIS sitting quite separately to other systems, that obviously can't be an automatic, if you like, digital way of doing that. But we have put in place a procedure now to make sure that those who no longer work with us are removed from the system. In terms of progress with the recommendations, there probably has been a slight delay on the back of the pandemic, but I'm confident that by the next meeting of this committee, all recommendations will have been met. Certainly the one that you draw attention to in particular, that one has been completed.
Okay, Convener, if I can just follow up. I take it's not just a CMIS account that would have to be deleted when somebody leaves. There would have to be their domain account as well into the council. So I'm struggling to see why one would be done but not the other.
Yeah, there is a system whereby schools will automatically cancel access to corporate accounts and what have you. But because CMIS sits as a separate system, it would almost be the same procedure but being applied in a different system. Apologies, Councillor Lumsden, I'm no expert on tech, but it's essentially repeating a process within a different system.
So I noticed Mr. Gami had his hand up. I don't know if he wanted to come in, Convener.
Well, I did. I saw that. It was just if you had any further. While you're on your point with Ms. Shepherd, do you want anything further before I take Mr. Gami in?
I think Mr. Gami might be addressing the point I'm raising. I'm not sure.
That's kind of what I thought as well. Thanks. Mr. Gami, can you help us here?
Certainly, Councillor. So I want to just interject on that. So we have currently actually deploying a tool that enables automation from the core records in HR into the domain accounts to actually automate that process. And then obviously the next step is automate that into the application layer.
Which is fine going forward. I'm struggling to understand why the leavers process wouldn't say delete domain account, delete CMIS account, and why can't the leavers process be changed to put that additional step in?
That is absolutely good practice, Councillor, and I think that's what we're planning to do, but it's not what currently happens.
Okay, thank you.
Coming back on Councillor Lumsden's point there, what's the sort of time scale to hopefully achieve that, Mr. Gami?
So we've actually deployed the pilot to teachers this week, and then the timescale will be to deploy quickly after that, and that's the kind of domain account level, and then we need to look at the application layer. So I think the domain account level should be done across the next quarter, but then the application layer we have to plan out further because that involves quite a bit of work to look at each application and how we integrate that kind of sign-on activity.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Any further questions for officers? I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, moving on. We have transformation at 1.11. Questions for officers? I'm not seeing any hands at all. 1.12, the gas servicing account. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, convener. I've been pretty voluble this morning. I'm on pages 165 and 166. So it's about compliance with policy. There's a recommendation about reviewing the charging policy position, but the narrative at 225. The narrative in the report makes it clear that committee did determine a charging policy in 2010, but it appears that the service isn't following this policy. First of all, I have a series of questions on these two matters, so I'd be grateful for a comment on that from the service, please.
Okay. Which officer wishes to take that one?
Convener, I'm happy to.
Mr. Booth.
Question. Yeah. So my understanding is this year's the charge hasn't been reviewed since 2010 when it was introduced. So the non-compliance is about the process and the fee not being reviewed during that period rather than not administered. That review has since taken place around the £120 charge, and that still covers our costs.
Okay.
So,
okay. Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Booth. Through you, convener, it's paragraph 2.2.2 of the report on page 165 says that the service proposed that there be a fee charged of £120 after the repeated third visit. The committee modified the proposal, presumably by amendment, and agreed to impose the charge after 2 visits. And it says that the service is imposing the charge after 3, not 2. So that's different to the level of charge. When is the service imposing a charge after a failed visit?
I'll come back to you formally on that when I've discussed that with the team, but we'll ensure that's compliant with the committee instruction.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that would be helpful. The second point I meant to make is the next recommendation about capping. If there's been, if access can't be given, can't be gained to inspect, and the report very worryingly says that at least 2 tenants have been capped for 3 months or more, and there doesn't seem to be a process in place for following that up. Now, I'm obviously, as I'm sure the committee are, concerned about vulnerable tenants here who may be unable or unwilling to engage with the need to get access to their properties. So I'd like to know what's being done about this and actually whether something should come to operational delivery about this policy.
So again, maybe just to answer your questions in order. Obviously, the audit's been very helpful in highlighting to me in particular a number of the issues you raised. That capping policy after the 3rd visit, where we couldn't gain access, was used really to stop the kind of arranged access procedure being used. That policy is stopped just now, and we're using the arranged access procedure where we can gain entry to property to do that safety check rather than capping. So capping will only take place now where gas isn't used in a property. Where capping does take place for safety reasons, there's now a process that there's a weekly follow-up with that tenant to resolve that. So one, there should be very little capping now and only really be for health and safety issues, and then where there's that subject to a weekly follow-up.
Okay. No, thank you, Mr. Booth. That is very reassuring because I'm sure you can understand why we would have been worried if there was capping going on and no process to rectify it. So I'm content with those answers, and I don't feel there needs to be a referral to operational delivery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Duncan. Any further questions to officers regarding this paper? Councillor Lumsden.
Thanks, convener. It's really just going back to the point I think Mr. Harvey made right at the summary paper. In terms of the contract, I think he said that this report wasn't quite right. There is actually a contract in place. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Mr. Harvey, do you want to come back on that?
I'd be happy to provide further details if that's helpful.
Yeah, please, Mr. Booth, if you come back first, then if we need to, we can ask Mr. Harvey.
In relation to the contract, the business case was presented to the Strategic Commissioning Committee on 28th of May 2019, and that approved us to use the Scotland Excel framework for gas servicing. The framework adoption report was prepared and signed off in November 19, and then following a capability and capacity test, we appointed the incumbent supplier Gascol to continue with the contract for a 4-year period from 1st of April. So it's appointment through Scotland Excel framework and approved by the committees I mentioned.
So I guess would the report then be amended, but it says in 2.31 that the last obtained approval was June 2018, which is, I guess, not quite correct then?
Yes, I would hope so.
Would that be correct, Mr. Harvey or Convener?
Thank you, Councillor. Convener. This was a timing issue, so we didn't have information to show that the contract was in place when we drafted and agreed this report with the service. That information has subsequently been provided, which shows that the contract is in place, which closes off the action that we have in this report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I had Mr. Innes with your hand up. I don't know if Mr. Innes wanted to add something helpful. Mr. Innes, have you got anything or has it been covered?
It's been covered. Mr. Booth covered it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lumsden, have you anything further?
No, I was just trying to think whether the what Councillor Duncan was saying about the charging and capping, whether that should go back to a committee at this point or not, for it to be agreed. But I don't know what officers feel.
Councillor Duncan, I've got you.
I mean, I think it's an opinion, Convener, not a question. I think I was satisfied with Mr. Booth's answer that the processes have been changed, and that the service has done that. So it would be for operational delivery to note, I suppose. But I can't see the need for a committee to make a decision on this because the service has acted and they are implementing the charging policy. Well, subject to the answer that we get on the implementation of the charging policy as agreed in 2010, but it seems that there's been checks done that the policy covers the costs, which is what we need it to do.
Yeah, I've got Mr. Booth. Mr. Booth?
Yeah, just trying to be helpful. If members would like some reassurance in terms of the policy and how that's calculated, I could perhaps provide a service update for Audit and Risk and Operational Committee that would just give members the comfort as to how that process works.
Okay, can we agree that that would be an appropriate course?
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay, I see Councillor Duncan nodding as well. Councillor, no, sorry, I've got Mr. Booth, your hand's still up, that's what it is. Sorry. Sorry. Any further questions, comments, requests on this paper? I'm not seeing any hands at this time, so we'll leave that with Mr. Booth. The next paper I have after the gas servicing account is the Social Care Commission Services Contract Monitoring. Have we any questions on the paper? Councillor, was that Councillor Lumsden? Were you coming in there? Sorry.
Mute, Convener, sorry.
Sorry, no, you're the blue light came around your photograph. No questions there. That takes us to 1.14, fostering and adoption payments. Do we have any questions for officers? I'm not seeing anything on my screen at all. So obviously we've got a number of updates coming back, and at least one service update, and also some further information being circulated to the various members from the committee. Has anyone got any other matters they wish to raise, given that we've obviously had an executive summary, and then we've obviously gone through the individual papers? Just before we wind up, is everybody happy? Anything further they wish to add or ask for? Getting no hands up. In that case, I can confirm that the meeting is now concluded and the recording will be stopped. I would thank everyone for their attendance and participation today. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll hopefully all meet together quite soon. Thank you very much.